The slave market on the edge of the alien station was always filled with noise, cries and cruel laughter. Merchants shouted prices, buyers argued, and the air smelled of oil, rust, and desperation. Among cages of different species, one figure sat quietly, not screaming, not begging, only trembling in silence. She was young, fragile, her skin pale under the harsh lights, and her lips pressed tightly together. The traders mocked her, calling her worthless, broken, and useless. Her crime was not theft, nor violence, but words. They said she had lied, spreading false warnings, and so, her punishment had been cruel. Her tongue had been cut away, so she could never speak again. Most buyers turned away in disgust, saying no one wanted a slave who could not even talk. Children pointed at her and laughed, while guards struck her cage with metal rods to make her flinch. Yet in her eyes there was something strange. It was not just fear, it was not just pain. It was the burning spark of truth. Locked behind silence at the far corner of the market, a human mechanic named Daniel searched through piles of spare parts. He was not rich, not powerful, only a worker who fixed broken engines and repaired old ships. His hands were rough, covered in scars from years of labor. He had come here to buy tools and scrap metal, not a slave. But when his gaze wandered toward the cages, he stopped, frozen in place. The girl's eyes met his, and in that instant, Daniel felt something he could not explain. Her gaze was not empty like the others. It was heavy, filled with a desperate plea. As if she was screaming without a voice, Daniel frowned, wondering why she looked at him this way. Why him, a stranger, a poor mechanic? The auctioneer noticed Daniel staring and laughed. "Ah, you look at the broken one," he shouted. His voice sharp, worthless trash, punished for lies, no tongue to wag, no words to sell, useless for work, useless for pleasure. Who will buy such a creature? The crowd roared with cruel laughter. The girl shrank back into her corner, but her eyes never left Daniel. Daniel turned away, trying to ignore the pull in his chest. He told himself he came for parts, not for slaves, not for trouble. Yet his ears caught whispers around him. She lied about danger, lied about some plot, and for that, they silenced her, one alien muttered. She brought shame to her people. Better she stays caged, another sneered. But Daniel saw the trembling in her hands, the way she clutched at the bars. She wanted someone to understand, someone to believe her, and for a moment, Daniel felt anger, not at her, but at the cruelty of those who judged her. What if she had spoken the truth? What if her punishment was not justice, but fear of her words? The auction began, voices shouting. Credits exchanged, slaves sold one by one. The broken girl's turn came, and the auctioneer spat on the ground. 5 credits, no, 3 credits, even 1. Who will waste money on a liar without a tongue? He mocked. The crowd jeered. Some shouted to throw her into the mines. Others said to abandon her in space. No one raised a hand, no one offered a coin. Daniel felt his heart pound. He knew buying her would be foolish. He barely earned enough to survive, but as the girl looked at him again, tears shining in her eyes, he could not move away. He saw not a liar, not broken flesh, but a soul crying for help, and deep inside, he sensed that her silence carried a truth too dangerous to ignore. The auctioneer laughed again. No one, of course, no one wants her, he said, raising his hand to strike her cage shut before he could. Daniel's voice cut through the noise. I will take her, he said, firm and clear. The market grew silent. Heads turned, eyes widened, and then the laughter began again, louder than before. Ha! The human mechanic buys garbage, they mocked. Spend your credits on scrap and silence. Fool, another shouted. Daniel ignored them. Stepping forward, his jaw set, he handed over the credits. His week's savings gone in a moment. The cage opened, and the girl stepped out slowly, her thin legs shaking. She looked up at him with wide eyes, not believing what had just happened. Daniel bent down slightly, offering his hand. Come on, he said softly. You are free from them now. The girl's fingers touched his hand, hesitant, trembling, but real. The crowd still laughed, but Daniel no longer heard them. In that moment, he felt the weight of a choice. He had taken home not a slave, but a mystery. A silent truth hidden in broken flesh, and he did not know it yet. But this choice would change his life forever. Daniel led the girl through the crowded streets of the station, ignoring the mocking voices that followed him. Look at the fool. Wasted credits on broken flesh, someone shouted. Another sneered. Better throw her into the junk pile with his rusty tools. But Daniel kept walking. his hand gently guiding her so she would not stumble. The girl stayed close to him, moving carefully, her thin frame trembling with each step. She had no chains now, but her silence was heavier than any metal shackle. Her eyes darted around, afraid of every sound, every shadow, as if she expected to be dragged back at any moment. Daniel noticed, and his chest tightened. He had seen broken machines, shattered engines, twisted steel, but this was different. This was a life that someone had tried to destroy. When they reached his small workshop, Daniel opened the heavy door, pushing aside a pile of spare parts. "Here we are," he said softly, though he knew she could not answer. The place smelled of oil and smoke. The walls lined with half-repaired engines, cables, and glowing tools. It was not much, but it was safe for the first time. The girl's shoulders lowered just slightly, as if she could breathe without fear. Daniel brought her a blanket and placed it on a bench. "You can rest here," he said, his voice steady. She looked at him, confusion and disbelief in her eyes. Most who bought slaves treated them like objects, tools to be used, not people to be cared for. Why was this human different? Why did he see her as something more? The girl tried to speak, her lips moving, but only silence came. She touched her throat, then her mouth, her eyes filling with frustration. Daniel shook his head gently. "It's all right. Don't force it," he said. He picked up a piece of scrap metal and handed her a piece of chalk. "Show me," he encouraged. She hesitated, then began scratching symbols on the surface, her hand shaking but determined. The marks were rough, broken drawings mixed with alien letters. Daniel leaned closer, frowning as he tried to understand. There were shapes of fire, a circle with cracks, figures running, and then darkness. It looked like an explosion or destruction. She pointed at the drawing again and again, her eyes pleading. Daniel realized she was trying to warn him of something terrible. His mind went back to the whispers in the market. They had called her a liar, punished her for spreading fear. But looking at her trembling hands, Daniel felt certain she had not lied. Whatever she had tried to tell her people, it was important and it had cost her everything. "Is this why they silenced you?" he whispered. The girl nodded quickly, tears slipping down her cheeks. She pressed her hands to her heart, then to her lips, and finally to the drawing. The message was clear. She had spoken from truth, not from malice. Daniel clenched his fists, anger rising in him. They had cut her tongue, not because she lied, but because they feared her truth. The girl wiped her tears and reached for another piece of metal. This time she drew the outline of the station, its towers, its glowing energy lines. Then she scratched jagged marks near the core. Repeating the motion with urgency, Daniel's eyes widened. She was warning about the station itself, about something hidden in its heart. "Sabotage," he muttered. He was only a mechanic, but he knew enough to recognize danger. The girl looked at him, fear and hope mixing in her gaze. For the first time, she felt someone believed her. Daniel placed a hand on her shoulder, steady and firm. "You're safe here," he said, "and I'll help you." The words were simple, but they carried weight to her. They were like light breaking through endless darkness. That night, Daniel barely slept. He kept thinking of her drawings, the fire, the cracked circle, the hidden danger. Could it be real, or had fear twisted her memory? But deep down, he trusted his instincts, and his instincts told him she was telling the truth. If she was right, the entire station was at risk. Thousands of lives, including his own, hung in the balance in the dim glow of his workshop. Daniel watched her sleep under the blanket. Her face was peaceful now, no longer twisted by fear. He felt a strange sense of responsibility, heavier than any engine he had ever carried. He had not only saved her from cruelty, he had stepped into a mystery far greater than himself. The choice he made at the market was no longer just about kindness. It was about survival, justice, and uncovering a truth that others wanted buried. And Daniel knew one thing with certainty. The girl's silence was not weakness. It was the key to something far more dangerous, something that he alone had chosen to face. The next morning, the station outside was alive with noise and trade, but inside Daniel's workshop, silence ruled. The girl sat on a bench, wrapped in the old blanket, her hands resting on her knees, her eyes following every movement Daniel made as he worked on a broken engine. She was no longer in a cage, yet her posture showed years of fear, as if chains still clung to her spirit. Daniel wiped the grease from his hands and looked at her. He could see she wanted to speak, to explain. but the absence of her tongue kept every word locked inside. Her eyes carried stories, memories she could not tell, and Daniel knew he had to find a way to bring them out. He placed a small board and a marker in front of her. "You can draw, you can show me," he said gently. She hesitated, her thin fingers shaking as they wrapped around the marker. Slowly she began to sketch, rough lines forming shapes across the board. The first drawing showed a large building, tall towers with strange markings. Daniel recognized it, the central hall of the station's council. Then she drew figures, tall and robed, surrounding her smaller figure. She marked her mouth with an X, then drew a blade. Daniel felt his chest tighten as he realized she was drawing her punishment. She tapped the robed figures again and again, her hand pressing hard. Daniel understood. It had been the council who ordered her silence. "They called you a liar," he whispered. Her eyes glistened with tears, and she nodded. She turned the board and began another drawing, this time jagged shapes, dark ships hovering outside the station. Then explosions, fire tearing through buildings, people running in terror. Daniel leaned closer, his brow furrowed. "You saw this," he murmured. The girl nodded again, more firmly this time. She had warned them of this vision, but instead of listening, they had destroyed her voice. Daniel sat back, his hands rubbing his face. If what she drew was real, then the station's leaders had ignored a threat that could destroy them all. Worse, they had silenced the only witness. The shadows of her past were not just her memories. They were warnings for the future. That evening, as Daniel worked late, the girl moved quietly around the shop. She picked up small tools, handing them to him without being asked. She wiped the dust from his workbench, arranging things neatly. Daniel noticed, surprised at how eager she was to help. Though she could not speak, her actions spoke louder than words. She wanted to prove she was not useless, not broken. After hours of silence, Daniel finally asked, "What do they call you?" She froze, lowering her head. He realized she had no name anymore, or perhaps she was afraid to share it. "Then I'll call you Mira," he said softly, "because your eyes are like mirrors, showing truths others don't want to see." Her lips curved into the faintest smile, the first he had seen. And in that fragile smile, Daniel felt something shift inside him, but shadows still lingered. Late at night, Mira startled awake from dreams she could not voice, her body shaking, her hands gripping the blanket. Daniel sat near the old heater, watching, not wanting to frighten her. He saw the haunted look in her eyes, the way she clutched her chest as if fighting to breathe. Her past was not just memory. It was pain that lived inside her, refusing to fade. The next day, Mira pointed at the door of the workshop, then at her drawings of the council and the station. She wanted to go back, to show more. Daniel hesitated, fear knotting in his stomach. If the council saw her alive and free, they might try to take her again, but Mira's determination was stronger than her fear. Her eyes begged him. She had more to reveal, and it could not remain hidden. Reluctantly, Daniel agreed. Together, they moved through the narrow streets of the station. Mira's hood pulled low over her face. The crowd bustled around them, unaware of the silent girl who carried secrets worth more than credits. At the edge of the council district, Mira tugged at Daniel's sleeve, pulling him toward a shadowed wall. There, she scratched new symbols into the dust, her hand urgent and quick. Daniel studied them, his heart racing. They showed tunnels beneath the council halls, lines leading to the energy core, and strange marks. Explosives, sabotage, danger. Mira pointed again and again, her eyes burning with urgency. Daniel realized she had seen things others had ignored. She had known the truth, and because of it, they had destroyed her voice. Now Daniel stood at a crossroads. He could turn away, pretend he saw nothing, live quietly in his workshop. Or he could trust her, trust the shadows of her past and step into a storm that might consume them both. Mira watched him, waiting, her silence heavier than any words. And Daniel, though only a mechanic, felt the weight of destiny pressing on his shoulders. For the first time, he understood the truth. The girl was not broken, not useless. She was a survivor, carrying knowledge that could save them all. And if no one else believed her, then he would, whatever the cost. The tunnels beneath the station were dark, filled with the smell of rust, oil, and damp air. Daniel held a small lantern in one hand, his other hand steadying Mira as she walked beside him. The narrow passages echoed with distant machinery, the thrum of energy pulsing like a heartbeat under the metal floor. Mira moved with purpose, her eyes sharp despite the shadows. She traced her fingers along the walls, then pointed to a section where panels were loose. Daniel crouched down, shining his light, and saw wires cut, connections bent, and strange devices hidden behind the metal. His stomach dropped. "Sabotage," he whispered. Mira nodded quickly, her eyes filled with urgency. She drew a jagged motion with her hands, then pointed downward, toward the power core beneath the station. Daniel realized what she was trying to tell him. If these devices triggered, the core would destabilize. The explosion would tear the entire station apart, killing thousands. His heart raced as he leaned closer, studying the devices. They were not built by ordinary criminals. These were advanced, precise, and deadly. Whoever had planted them knew the engineering of the station well. This was not just smuggling or petty crime. It was a planned attack. Mira tugged his sleeve, urging him to follow deeper into the tunnels. Daniel hesitated, but the determination in her eyes gave him no choice. They moved silently, deeper into the shadows. At one bend, voices echoed ahead. Low and sharp, Daniel pulled Mira behind a broken panel, holding his breath. Two figures in dark cloaks stood near a junction, whispering in a strange dialect. Daniel caught only fragments. "Shipment ready. Timed for council. No survivors." Cold dread filled him. This was worse than he imagined. The saboteurs were planning not only destruction but slaughter, timed to wipe out the leaders above. Mira's hand gripped his tightly, her eyes wide. She had warned them once, and they had silenced her. Now her truth stood alive before his eyes, undeniable. Daniel's mind raced. He could not fight armed saboteurs alone, but he also could not walk away. When the cloaked figures moved deeper into the tunnels, Daniel exhaled slowly. He turned to Mira, whispering, "We need proof." Mira nodded, already scribbling shapes into the dust. Boxes, wires, explosive symbols. She was showing him where to look. The storage chambers hidden beneath the old cargo docks. Hours later, Daniel pushed open a rusted hatch and entered a chamber lined with crates. The lantern's light revealed rows of fuel cells, stolen from the station's reserves, each one rigged with detonators blinking faint red in the darkness. Daniel's chest tightened. This was enough power to turn the entire council district into ash. Mira moved to one of the crates, her hands trembling as she pointed at the symbols carved into the metal. They were not just warnings. They were codes, marks of an organized group. Daniel recognized one of them. He had seen it scratched on a broken ship he once repaired, a symbol of the Black Veil, a syndicate feared across the outer colonies. If they were behind this, the danger reached far beyond this station. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, his mind a storm. He was just a mechanic. He fixed engines, not wars. Yet here he stood, holding the truth that leaders had ignored, the same truth that Mira had tried to share, only to be mutilated for it. His fists clenched. If he did nothing, everyone here would die. But if he spoke, would anyone believe him? Mira stepped closer, her eyes steady on his. She pressed her hand to his chest, then to the crates, then to her lips. The same gesture she had made before. Her silent message was clear. "You must speak for me. You must be my voice." Daniel swallowed hard, feeling the weight of her trust. For years he had been invisible, a simple worker in the shadows of the station. But now, silence was no longer an option. He had taken Mira from the market, given her safety, and in return, she had given him the truth. The buried truth that could not remain hidden any longer. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps echoed behind them, heavy and close. Daniel grabbed Mira's hand and pulled her behind a stack of crates. Two saboteurs entered, carrying more devices, their cloaks brushing the floor. Daniel's breath caught, his lantern dimmed, Mira pressed against him, her hand gripping his arm, her eyes fierce despite her fear. The saboteurs spoke in low voices. "Tomorrow, during the council's speech, the power core will fail," one said. "By the time they realize, the entire district will be gone." The other replied with a cruel laugh. Mira's nails dug into Daniel's sleeve, her eyes screaming the words she could not say. This was it. The truth confirmed. When the saboteurs left, Daniel finally breathed again. He knew what he had to do. They had the evidence, the knowledge, the warning. Now they needed to bring it to the surface, to make the council see. But part of him still feared. Would the leaders listen this time? Or would they silence him as they had silenced Mira? As they climbed back through the tunnels, Daniel looked at Mira walking beside him. Her steps were steady, her eyes unbroken. She had lost her tongue, but not her strength. Her silence was louder than any voice, and it pushed Daniel forward. The truth was buried deep, but together, they would drag it into the light. The station lights flickered overhead as Daniel and Mira emerged from the tunnels, their faces pale from the shadows they had walked through. Daniel's mind spun with everything they had seen: stolen fuel cells, hidden devices, saboteurs planning the council's destruction. He wanted to scream the truth to the whole station, but fear clawed at his chest. Would anyone believe him? A poor mechanic, when even Mira, the true witness, had been punished for daring to speak. Mira tugged at his sleeve, her eyes sharp. Pointing toward the crowded plaza ahead, her gestures were fast, urgent, her hands drawing invisible symbols in the air. She wanted to move quickly, to act before it was too late. Daniel nodded, though doubt gnawed at him. If they waited, the saboteurs would finish their work. If they spoke too soon, they might be silenced. They reached Daniel's workshop, locking the heavy door behind them. The room felt smaller now, as if the shadows from the tunnels had followed them. Daniel spread a broken panel across the table, grabbing chalk and scrap pieces of wire. "Show me again," he urged Mira. She began to sketch rapidly in the tunnels, the crates, the devices wired to the power core. Her lines grew darker with each stroke, her desperation bleeding into the drawings. Daniel leaned over the sketches, his jaw tight. "And tomorrow," he muttered. "They're planning it tomorrow." Mira slammed her hand against the board, nodding fiercely. Her eyes burned with fear, but also with determination. She had carried this warning alone for too long. Now she had someone who believed her, and together they could act. A sudden crash outside made Daniel freeze. Mira's head snapped toward the sound, her body tense like a cornered animal. Voices echoed in the street, deep, harsh, searching. Daniel's heart sank. The saboteurs had noticed their hidden chamber disturbed. Someone had followed them. He quickly dimmed the lights, pulling Mira behind a stack of broken engines. The door rattled violently, then burst open. 3 cloaked figures stormed inside, their boots striking the metal floor. "Search everything," one barked. Daniel held Mira close, their breaths shallow. The intruders kicked tools aside, overturning crates, their eyes scanning the shadows. One of them lifted a lantern, the glow moving closer to where Daniel and Mira hid. Mira gripped Daniel's arm, her nails digging into his skin. Her silent eyes begged him not to move. Daniel's pulse thundered in his ears. If they were caught now, there would be no trial. No mercy, only silence forever at the last second. A loud crash echoed outside, a drunk worker stumbling against a cart. The saboteurs cursed, lowering their light. "Waste of time." "No one's here," one muttered. They stormed out, slamming the door behind them. Daniel exhaled shakily, his body trembling. Mira clung to him, her face pressed against his shoulder, her breath uneven. When the danger passed, Daniel whispered, "We can't wait. We need to move now." Mira nodded, wiping her tears, and pointed to the drawings again. Her hand circled the council chamber, then tapped his chest. Daniel understood he had to carry the truth to them, even if it meant risking everything. The next hours were a blur. Daniel gathered broken devices from his shop, wiring them to demonstrate the sabotage he had seen. Mira helped by drawing maps and symbols, her silent testimony carved onto scraps of metal. They worked side by side, the weight of time pressing down on them. Every tick of the station's clock was another step toward destruction. When dawn came, the plaza outside filled with people, merchants setting up stalls, children running through the alleys, guards marching toward the council halls. Daniel and Mira slipped into the crowd, their bundle of sketches and parts hidden beneath his coat. Every face looked suspicious, every shadow a threat. Mira's hood covered her face, but her eyes scanned constantly, alert to danger. As they neared the council district, Daniel spotted cloaked figures blending with the guards. His chest tightened. The saboteurs had infiltrated everywhere. Mira tugged his sleeve, gesturing toward a side path. They ducked into the narrow alley, moving quickly toward the great hall. But just as they reached the steps, a voice called out, "Stop!" Two cloaked saboteurs blocked their way, weapons hidden beneath their robes. Daniel's heart pounded. He pushed Mira behind him, gripping the bundle tightly. "What's this?" one sneered. "A mechanic playing hero," the other smirked. And the little liar girl still alive after all. How disappointing. Mira's body shook, but her eyes blazed with fury. Daniel stepped forward, his voice steady though fear burned in his chest. "You'll never silence her again," he said. With a sudden move, he threw the bundle onto the ground, wires and sketches spilling across the steps. The saboteurs lunged, but the commotion drew the attention of nearby guards. Shouts erupted, people gathered, eyes turning to the strange scene. Daniel raised his voice louder than ever before. "They plan to destroy the power core," he shouted. Tomorrow, during the council's speech, "This girl tried to warn you and you cut her tongue for it. But she spoke the truth." Gasps spread through the crowd. The guards hesitated, their weapons lowering in confusion. The saboteurs tried to flee, but the people surged forward, blocking their path. Mira grabbed Daniel's sleeve, her eyes wide with hope and fear. The race had begun, and the outcome would decide whether the station lived or died. The council chamber was filled with noise and confusion. Guards dragged the cloaked saboteurs forward, while others pointed their weapons at Daniel and Mira, unsure who was friend or foe. The crowd outside pressed against the gates, whispering, shouting, demanding answers. For the first time in years, the silent halls of power trembled with unrest. Daniel stood tall, though his heart thundered in his chest. Mira clung to his arm, her hood falling back, her scarred mouth visible to all. Gasps filled the chamber as the counselors recognized her. "The liar girl," one muttered, his voice dripping with contempt. Another counselor's face darkened with shame. Though he said nothing, Daniel's voice rang out, steady and strong. "She warned you once and you silenced her," he said, his words cutting through the room like steel. "But she was right. Your city, your people, are standing on the edge of destruction." He kicked the bundle of sketches and wires across the marble floor. The guards knelt to examine them, frowning as the crude devices mirrored the sabotage hidden beneath the station. One counselor sneered, "This is nothing but a mechanic's trick." But another's eyes widened in fear as he studied the diagrams. "These connections," he muttered, "they match the power tunnels." "Exactly." Mira stepped forward, shaking, her eyes fixed on the robed figures. She raised her hands, drawing shapes in the air, mimicking the explosion, the fire, the death she had once described. Her silence roared louder than words, every gesture carried weight, her trembling fingers painting the truth into the air. The counselors shifted uncomfortably, remembering the day they had cut her tongue, remembering how they had chosen pride over listening. One of the captured saboteurs laughed suddenly, his voice cold. "Believe us or not, it makes no difference," he spat. "The Black Veil's work is already complete. Tomorrow your council will burn." Gasps filled the chamber again, the crowd outside shouting in fear. The guard struck him silent, but the damage was done. The threat was undeniable. Daniel clenched his fist, stepping closer to the counselors. "You can keep doubting," he said fiercely, "but your doubt will kill everyone here. This girl saw what you refused to see. She suffered for it, and yet she still came back to save you." He pointed at Mira, his voice rising. "She has no voice, so I will speak for her. And I say this, if you ignore her again, you will have blood on your hands." The hall fell into silence, the weight of his words pressing down on every corner. Mira stood tall beside him, her eyes wet but unbroken. For the first time she was not hidden, not mocked, not silenced. She was seen, her truth standing before them in flesh and scar. One elder counselor, his face lined with age, rose slowly. His voice shook as he spoke. We made a mistake," he admitted. "We called her a liar when she told us the truth." He turned to the others, shame heavy in his eyes. "We cut her tongue to silence her. But it is we who were blind, not her." The younger counselors shifted uncomfortably, their arrogance faltering under the eyes of the people gathered outside. A murmur rose in the crowd, growing louder. The girl was right, someone whispered. Her silence is our warning, another said. Mira lifted her hand, pressing it to her chest, then to her lips, then stretching it outward toward the council. Her silent vow echoed louder than any speech. She had carried the truth through pain, and now she offered it again. Not for revenge, but for survival. Daniel felt pride swell in his chest, though she could not speak. She was the loudest voice in the hall. The council could not ignore her now, not with the crowd outside demanding answers, not with the saboteur's own confession ringing in their ears. Finally, the elder counselor nodded, his voice steady. Prepare the guards, he commanded. Search every tunnel, every chamber, every fuel cell. Bring the people to safety, seal the core chambers. No one enters without clearance, the guards saluted, rushing out to spread the orders. For the first time, Mira's eyes softened. Her trembling slowing, she looked at Daniel. Gratitude shining in her gaze. He had given her back something greater than her voice. He had given her the chance to be heard. But even as the council moved, Daniel knew the danger was not over. The saboteurs had planted their devices with precision. Time was running short, and the black veil would not stop easily. He turned to Mira, whispering, "This is only the beginning." She nodded. Her silence filled with strength. She had been broken, but now her truth had become their shield. The council might act too late. The saboteurs might strike harder, but no matter what came, Daniel and Mira would face it together, and so, in the grand chamber where her tongue had once been taken, Mira stood reborn, her voice gone, but her silence roaring louder than thunder. The station would remember her not as a liar, but as the girl who had spoken truth without words, the girl who had warned them all. The station never slept. But that night it felt like every eye was open. Guards rushed through tunnels, dismantling hidden devices, while engineers worked beside them, sweating as they tried to stabilize the power core. The council had declared a state of emergency, the streets filled with fear and whispers. But at the heart of it all stood a human mechanic and a silent girl, the unlikely pair who had dragged the truth into the light. Daniel stayed by Mira's side as chaos unfolded. He refused to let her be left alone again, not after what she had suffered. Together they walked the halls of the council, watching soldiers carry crates of stolen fuel cells into the open. Every box removed was proof of her truth, and every shaken guard was another reminder that they had almost ignored her twice. The elder counselor approached Daniel, his voice heavy. "You saved this station," he said. "We owe you more than we can repay." Daniel shook his head, his eyes firm. "You owe her," he said simply, placing a hand on Mira's shoulder. "She warned you first, and you punished her for it. You silenced her when you should have listened." The counselor's face fell with shame, and he bowed his head toward Mira. The chamber fell silent as others followed, offering respect to the girl they once mocked. Mira's eyes filled with tears, but they were not tears of pain. For the first time since her punishment, she felt seen, not as broken flesh, not as a liar, but as someone who mattered. Her silence had become her power, and now it echoed in the hearts of all who looked upon her. But victory had not come without cost. When the saboteurs realized their plan had failed, some fled into the shadows, vowing revenge. The black veil would return one day. Daniel knew this, the council knew it too, but now, the people had learned a lesson. Never again would they dismiss a voice. Never again would they destroy truth out of pride. In the days that followed, the council passed new decrees. Slaves accused of lies would no longer be mutilated. Trials would require proof, and witnesses would be heard. It was a small change in the vast galaxy, but it was born from Mira's courage. And though her tongue was gone, her silence had reshaped the law. Daniel returned to his workshop with Mira at his side. The place that once smelled only of oil and smoke now carried the warmth of new beginnings. Mira cleaned the benches, arranged the tools, and even learned to handle simple repairs. Daniel watched her carefully, teaching her little by little. Every gesture between them grew into a language only they shared, a language stronger than words. One evening, as the sun of the nearby star cast golden light through the station's windows, Mira stood at the door of the workshop. Watching the crowd outside, children waved at her, smiling, no longer mocking. Merchants nodded in respect as they passed. The girl once called worthless was now remembered as the one who saved them all. Daniel stepped beside her, wiping grease from his hands. "You changed this place," he said softly. Mira turned to him, her eyes shining. She pressed her hand to her chest, then to his, then pointed outward toward the people. Her meaning was clear. We changed it. Not just her, not just him, but together. For the first time, Daniel allowed himself a small smile. He had entered that market only to buy spare parts. But fate had placed Mira in his path, a broken girl who was not broken at all, a liar who had never lied, and in saving her, he had discovered something greater than any machine he had ever repaired. He had discovered hope. In the weeks that followed, Mira's drawings became known across the station. She carved her warnings and her memories into metal panels, displayed in the plaza for all to see. They were not only records of danger but lessons in courage. The people began to call her the Silent Witness, and her name, Mira, given by a mechanic's kindness, became a symbol of truth that could not be destroyed. But to Daniel, she was not a symbol, she was family. He refused to see her as a slave or a survivor only. She was his partner, his friend, the one who reminded him that even the smallest person could hold the greatest strength. Every day she grew stronger, her steps steadier, her eyes brighter. The shadows of her past no longer controlled her. She was walking into a future that belonged to her, and so on a quiet evening, as the stars glittered beyond the station's walls, Daniel sat beside her, tools scattered on the floor, engines humming in the background. "You don't need a voice to change the world," he said quietly. "You already did," Mira smiled, tears shining in her eyes, her silence speaking louder than any answer. Together they looked toward the horizon, the girl once silenced and the mechanic who chose to listen. Two unlikely souls bound by truth, courage, and compassion. A new beginning had risen not just for them, but for the entire station, and though danger might return one day, they knew they would face it side by side, for the truth could be buried, but never destroyed, and silence, when carried with courage, could roar like thunder.